Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're going to look at the rear springs of an MGB GT. We will be talking about the ratings of the springs, what they do, why you want to change the springs, and then we'll replace a set of those on this MGB GT. So now the question is, why do you want to change the springs on your MG or your MGB GT? Well, there are many reasons why you want to do so. Over time, springs become lame, especially on older cars like the MGs. They've been around for many years, so you might just want to change out those springs. On the other hand, you actually may have a broken leaf in one of the springs. So if a leaf is broken, then the car will hang to one side, and then it's time to change them as well. And then finally, you may want to change the road feeling, the road handling of the car by maybe lowering the whole car, getting stronger springs. And then we're talking about springs with a different rate. And I'll talk about the rates in a few minutes. But whatever you do, you always have to change them in pairs. Never change one spring. I just mentioned the word rate, and rate is something we use to identify springs. What it means is that how much deflection or compression does the spring have under a certain load. And I have two springs right here. I have an Charlie 31, which is the standard default spring for an MG. Early versions came with 5 blades, later versions came with 6 blades inside the spring. On the bottom I have another spring, which is the Alpha Hotel Tango 20, which is kind of a special one, but I'll come back to that in a minute. The Alpha Hotel Charlie 31 is fitted both on the chrome bumper and on the rubber bumper MGs, and it has a deflection of 1 inch for the chrome bumper under a load of 93 pounds. A rubber bumper, Charlie 31, has a deflection of 1 inch at a load of 110 pounds. So depending on what car you have, the spring will bend more or less downwards. And the reason that you see that difference between 93 pounds and 110 pounds of force onto the spring for the deflection of 1 inch is just because that the body, the shell of the chrome bumper is heavier than the shell that you actually have on a rubber bumper. Now, leaves are only depressing under the weight of the shell, right? They don't depress because of the weight of the rear axle. The rear axle is mounted underneath, so that has no effect. The wheels have no effect. It is the real shell onto the spring that makes the difference. All right, so let's have a look on the second spring now. This one is a different spring. This is a Alpha Hotel Tango 20. Now this is what we call a competition spring. This is going to lower down the car with about 2 inches. And the compression or the rate is different. This will compress with 1 inch under a load of about 124 to about 125 pounds. So that's a bit different than the top one. So let me show you what the difference is on those two, and you will immediately see how much difference we have in the elliptical form of those two springs. Now you can easily see the difference between the two springs. This is the standard spring for the MG, and this is the competition spring. You can see the difference in height. There's quite some difference. But then again, don't be misled, because the original spring will depress faster than the competition spring. This is stronger. This is 124 pounds. This is about 93 to about 100 pounds for 1 inch. So at some moment in time, they will catch up to each other. So again, depending on what you want to use the car for, you might want to go for the original spring, or you might want to go for a competition spring, which is lowering the car with 2 inches. So if you get new springs, you may have actually bushes in it or no bushes. It depends on what spring you get. So in the worst case, you will have to buy new bushes and install new bushes. So if you're going to change out your springs, make sure that you use new bushes. That's always very good practice. The competition spring, they have bushes with a steel insert in the middle. But the standard spring, once you get it and you get the kit for mounting it, they typically come with these rubber bushes that go inside. And there's one on each side, and the shackle comes through this, which is then attached to the chassis. You can take springs apart. That is not an issue. You have to undo this bolt right in the middle, put it in a vise, and then you can take the leaves all apart, and you will need to take off the clamps that you have around the leaves on the different places, bend it open, slide it off, and then you can take all the leaves apart and grease them up and then put it back together. I don't know why I would do this, because that's maybe we did something in the old days, but nowadays it isn't worthwhile the effort, I think. So if you decide to install new springs, it's always good to have a mounting kit with it. These are the two main brackets that are holding the spring towards the rear axle. Two rubbers that are there to support these plates, and it all goes inside, and you'll see it in a few minutes. So this is how this has been put together, and I'm going to show you on how we mount all this. Then you have some bushes for the shackle, then you have the pedestal, and on top of here you have the rubber bump stop. Now mine are still good, but if yours are no good anymore, get the rubber bump stop as well. And then you typically have a new bolt to bolt down actually the spring to the chassis in the front. In my opinion, it isn't worthwhile the effort to clean up the old parts to mount the spring onto the rear axle. You're so much better off with a new mounting kit. It's cheap and it really works very well. On my MGB GT, I have fitted on one side a competition spring and on the other side the standard spring. And I'm going to show you what the difference is in riding height. This is the side where I have the competition spring fitted. And you can see how deep down the wheel is already inside the wheel arch. So let us just measure that from the edge of the wheel arch towards the center of the hub, and that's about 29 centimeters. Now let's have a look on the other side. This side has the standard spring fitted, and you can already see that the tire is not that deep in the wheel arch, so let's measure that again in the same way. And the distance I measure is roughly about 33 centimeters. So that is 4 centimeters different, or that is about 2 inches. I know 2 inches is about 5 centimeters, but it's more or less that. So now you can see the difference. So this is how you can influence the riding height of your car depending on the spring you put up. So now you're probably going to ask me if I would recommend standard springs or competition springs. Well, again, that all depends on what you want to use the car for. My experience with both of them, and I tried both, is that the competition springs are pretty hard. And if you just take the car on the road and you don't do competition, don't put them up. It's not worthwhile. It's not that comfortable. And I change them every so often. Maybe if I go to a track day, I'm certainly going to put the competition springs on. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to swap out one of those springs so you can actually see on how you remove them and how you install another spring. Changing the springs doesn't take more than an hour. But you will need some tools. And you're certainly going to need 2 stands to put the car on in the back, and don't put the stand underneath the rear axle, because otherwise you can't work. Put it underneath the chassis where it's strong enough where it can support. So you jack up the car, put the stands underneath, one on the left, one on the right. And then you're going to need an additional jack afterwards to hold up that rear axle. So it doesn't really matter if you're going to use a lift or not, you're still going to need a jack of some sort to lift up that rear axle or support that rear axle while you're removing the spring. I'll use a lift because it's easier. I'm an old man and I just happen to have one. But if you use a lift, make sure that it is one where the wheels are free, because the wheels have to be free. So now we're going to take off the wheel first so we have good access. So here's our spring. That's the one we're going to replace, and it's connected in the back with a shackle. In the front it's bolted to the chassis, and in the middle it is connected to the rear axle. So I guess the most interesting area is around the rear axle, and as you can see we have a bottom plate which is holding the shock absorber attachment. Now mine is a modified one, it's already a gas-based one, yours may still be the hydraulic one, it doesn't really matter. But that's the lowest plate. Then you have a metal plate like this one right here that sits underneath together with this rubber that goes in like this. So the two together fit in there. The same thing is happening on the top there, like so. And then we have the two big brackets that come over it. And this is the bracket, by the way. And this just goes over the axle and the pedestal. And the pedestal is all the way on the top. And here we have also a pedestal. This is a new one. And on all the way on the top, you have the bump stop. And that's really all there is to it at the axle side. So now let's have a look at the chassis side where all this connects. The front of the spring is where the big eyelet is on. And here you can actually see it. Hopefully you can see it. This is the big part. That's the part that fits to the front side of the car. And there's a bolt going through that. And here is that bolt that actually fits all the way through it. And all you need to do is remove that bolt. And then this whole thing becomes loose and you can tilt it out. And in the back we have the shackle. It is a plate with a bolt welded on it on the top and on the bottom. It sticks through this member here, and then you undo the two nuts here, and then this little plate comes off, and that's all there is to it really. The bushes that you find inside are these, and we looked on those before. These are the ones that are for the normal spring, not the competition spring. The competition spring has a bush inside with a steel reinforcement in the middle. Okay, so let's start and take this apart. The first thing I'm going to do now is to support my rear axle. Now in your case, you may be using a stand on your car, so you will need to put your jack underneath and then support this axle. Not where these springs are, but a little bit further down towards the differential. Now once you have that supported, then you can start undoing the bolts. So let me move this in place. I'm just using a standard jack for gearboxes and differentials. Pretty handy on the lift. And again, not that expensive. So good tools make a hell of a difference if you have to work. Just going to use a wooden block to support that. This block might not be high enough. So might need to use a bigger block. This way, making sure it's straight under. Okay, that looks good. I'm just going to jack it off slightly so that really it is supported, and that's it. So you don't need to force the car back up so it comes off the stand. Just enough force so you can feel that the rear axle goes up a little bit. So the next step is first to remove the shock. Once we remove the shock, then I'm going to remove actually the bolts here that are holding the spring to the rear axle. And then I will start removing the back shackle and then the front bolt. All right. Now I should be able to remove the shock. Here we go. The side that you're seeing right now is where we have the competition spring on. So if you wonder why I'm swapping this out, well, I'm going to put back my original road spring. Because I had the competition spring on for a track day, but now this is going to go back off, and you'll see how we do this. So, as I said, the next step to do is to remove the bolts on the brackets, and then the whole thing will potentially come down a bit. So let's remove those. Now remember, before you undo these, you have to make sure that the rear axle is really supported with the jack, okay? And I'm going to do one at a time, but not in full. So that went very easily, as you could see. The nuts that I'm using are self-locking nuts, so we'll have to put new ones up. So this is the plate that holds the shock absorber. Let me move that aside. Now you can see we have the rubber right here sitting in here and the metal plate, so that's the first one. You can see how it goes on there, right? And then we can take the rubber off, hopefully. Yep, there we go. So now I'm using a soft hammer to move that up. And all right, so this is working fairly smoothly actually. A little bit more. All right, and now we should be able to get everything from underneath. All right, so here we go. We've got the pedestal removed and the brackets on there. So that's going to go back on because this is brand new, but in your case it may not be new, so you might want to replace that with a new piece. Okay, so now this is completely loose. And you can see I can move the spring back and forth a bit and the axle doesn't come down. If the axle is coming down, you need to jack it up a bit more. So now I'm going to remove the nut from the bolt at the front of the spring, but I'm not going to remove the bolt yet. Now in your case it might be a bit more difficult because my bolts are being replaced quite a couple of times, so it goes very smooth. In your case it may be all rusted away, so it might be a little bit more tough. So now we need to remove the shackle, and there's a nut there and a nut on the top. I already removed one nut and I'm going to remove this one. There's no need to show you on how to remove a nut, I guess. And then you can take this plate off. But now you have to be a bit careful because this spring now, we will have to lower it. And you have to push the shackle out that way. So it might be a bit of pushing initially. A few hits with a hammer might help sometimes. There we go, not a lot. See, the shackle moves backwards now. But be careful because the spring will drop down, so you have to hold the spring, push the shackle a bit backwards, and then you can lower the spring completely. So let's see if that is going to work. And there we go. See, now the spring is loose, but it's still held in with the front bolt, so now we can let the spring down. And the shackle, well, that's still there. You can leave it there, you can take it out. So I'm going to leave my shackle in because I had it replaced before, so it doesn't really matter. But you see there we have a bushing. This is this rubber bushing right there. That goes in there. There's another one that goes on the other side. And then the bolt of the shackle goes through it on the top. And the same thing is going to happen here when we install the new spring. We'll have the two bushes sitting like this. But that's once we start to reinstall the spring. Removing the spring is now pretty easy. All you need to do is lift it up and jiggle a bit and pull this bolt out, and then it just comes out like that. Installing the new spring is basically the opposite operation. We're going to connect first of all the spring in the front with the bolt. I'm not going to bolt it down, I'm just going to let it sit there, but connect it with the bolt so it can't fall out. I'm going to let it hang down. Then I'm going to install this metal part here and the rubber part on top of the spring. That goes right underneath actually the rear axle. That's important because otherwise you can't get it in anymore. Then I'm going to push up that spring in the back, connect it to the shackle, have the new bushes in there, put the shackle through the rear part of the spring so it's in place, and then I'm going to install the pedestal and the locking bolts and the plates underneath, and of course the plate for the shock absorber, and that's basically it. And then we are done on this side, and then of course I still have to do my other side, but I'm not going to show you that because it's exactly the same. So we're going to install the new spring, and the first thing we're going to do is connect it to the front. And this is the big eyelet on the spring, and the bolt that I'm using is a new bolt, and I have it actually greased up with anti-corrosion grease, so I don't like my things to get rusty, and they do anyway, but I'll try to prevent it if I can. So let me get the spring and we give it a try. So this spring I'm putting up now is my AC31, and I might be in the way a little bit. I try not to be. All right, and I'm going to try to put the bolt in now. There we go. Bolt this through, and now I can let it suspend on it. Not a big deal. So here I need to install the rubber and the metal plate. So first of all, we will put the rubber up like so it catches the spring, and then the metal plate goes on top of that. And that's all there is to it. So before I push up the spring to the shackle, I need to put the bushes in the back end. And remember, the back end is a small eyelet. And I put some anti-corrosion grease up. This is not affecting rubber. And then you put the bushes up. And these are going in very easily. On the competition spring, these are different. Before you connect the spring to the shackle, you need to put new bushes up in the frame. Now, I already have done this last week because I changed these springs last week. So I don't need to do it again. So we are good to go on that one. All right, so let me push up that rear spring and try to connect it to the shackle. This might be a little bit of fiddling, but it should not work. It shouldn't be that hard to do. There we go. And that's in place. So we'll put the shackle plate back up. I'm not going to bolt anything down yet. That's for later. Come on, there we go. Next is installing the pedestal, and here we have the pedestal. So I'm going to slide it over the rear axle, making sure that I don't get the brake lines caught. And let's see where this goes here. This goes right in the back, and let me just, there we go. And now we need to fit it through the holes of that top plate here. So this is always a little bit of fiddling to get the holes aligned, but it works. All right, make sure that the pedestal is in the right place. Okay. The rubber is fitted properly because that's important. You don't want to squeeze it in the wrong place. Now, as you can see, we have a bit of a problem with these standard springs. They are hanging down very low because we've seen that on the curve, and these U-bolts are not long enough. So now we need to push up the spring a bit while still supporting the rear axle. So I have a piece of wood here that I can jack up, and I'm going to put all the parts up first, and then I'm going to jack up that spring, and then we connect everything, and that should be working just fine. So let me lower that piece of wood first because I want to have a piece of Teflon in between. All right, so let's see if this is going to work. So like this and like that. All right, so now I'm going to move up the spring. Now let's see if this is going to work. I can leave that all hanging there and see if the spring is getting into place, right? And it seems like it's going. And you want to make sure that that fits properly onto the axle. All right, I think that is now in place. So you got to be a bit careful here. Okay. So all I need to do now is put these rods through the plates and put a bolt up. I have two already. So there we go. That's one. That's number two. Sometimes you have to be a bit inventive, otherwise you may not be able to do the things you want to do. Make sure the pedestal is good, and now let's push down the second part through the holes if we can. Yep, that goes in. Okay. Now once we got these bolts up, we can actually bolt it all down and the spring will stay in place. So let me bolt those down a bit so they don't move out. I think I'm going to release the jack a bit now. All right, let me release the jack. And that's about it. You don't need to do it more than that. I think this is now in place. Let's put back the shock absorber. All what's left now is to lock down this bolt and the two nuts on the shackle, and then we are done. And as you have seen, this was not all that difficult. Yeah, that is good. And now we bolt down the shackle. Let's remove the axle support. There's no more need for that. Everything is now in place. So folks, we have come to the end of this video, and as you could see, this is not very difficult to do. It's a little bit of fiddling using jacks and stands, but everybody can do this. So if you have any comments, please put them down in the comment line. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down, but tell me why, so next time I can make the necessary changes. And that's about it. So I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.